Where did the trope of black superheroes with lightning powers come from? Well, it's all DC's fault, and some of it was because they were being pretty shady.
So why are there so many black superheroes with electricity powers? Is it thematic, a callback to an older trope, or just a happy accident?
There are a lot of black characters in comic books with electric superpowers. We got Storm, we got Static.
Why do black superheroes always seem to have lightning abilities? Not that there's anything wrong with it, but the number of characters with electric-based powers is pretty noticeable.
So one of the narratives on these comic book streets is that there are apparently too many black superheroes with electric powers. And I've been keeping my pulse on this conversation for quite some time, but I had to go ahead and do a video because there's a bigger issue here that needs to be addressed. But first, no, there aren't a lot of black superheroes with electric powers. In fact, let's go ahead and debunk it right now. So, black superheroes that don't have electric powers. Blade, Luke Cage, Misty Knight, Hotspot, Spectrum, Thunder, Temper, Naomi, The Silencer, Cinch, Bloodwind, Vixen, Fuerza, John Stewart, Black Panther and the Wakandans, Spawn, Batwing, Signal, Mr. Terrific, Cloak, Ironheart, Steel, Blue Marvel, Night Thrasher, Joe Mullane, Frenzy, Cecilia Reyes, Marilyn Moonlight, War Machine, Darwin, Bishop, Moon Girl, Fastos, Falcon, Nubia, Icon, Rocket, Goliath, Sunspot, Brother Voodoo, and Jason Roche. Now, I know what most of you are going to say. Well, no one knows who half of these characters even are. Now, while that might be true, that's actually the point. See, the issue isn't that there are too many black superheroes with electric powers, which I just debunked, but the real issue is that there aren't enough black comic book characters that are mainstream, which brings me to the point of this video. Black comic book characters have had a long history where they were either severely underrepresented or depicted using negative stereotypes, but over the last few decades, a lot of progress has been made, and not only has there been more black characters than ever in the comic books, but they've been depicted more positively. But that's just the tip of the iceberg in my opinion. See, I believe that there just aren't enough black characters that are mainstream, because if there were, then there's no way there would be this narrative that there's too many of them with electric powers. So in this video, I'm going to discuss three main factors that I think are holding back black comic book characters in general. Let's begin. So the first point I want to touch on is race swapping. Race swapping is usually a topic that comes up when we talk about black characters being represented in general, and some people support it and some are against it. Obviously, I'm one of those people who are against it. But see, I'm a guy who tries to see the bigger picture, and race swapping, in my opinion, only works in the short term. Now remember, the real issue is that there aren't enough black characters that are mainstream. So when people demand the representation in regards to black characters, that should be the goal. So I want you guys to look at the screen real fast. Do you recognize this character? If you don't, this is Harvey Dent. Yes, Harvey Dent was race swapped in the Batman film from 1989. If you didn't know this was Harvey Dent, it's probably because Harvey Dent is canonically a white male. And the majority of the adaptations, Harvey Dent has been portrayed as such. I'll give you another example. Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin. Kingpin was race swapped in the Daredevil film from 2003. Yet most of the adaptations, Kingpin has been accurately depicted as a white male. I'll give you one last example. This is Eartha Kitt as Catwoman in the Batman TV show from the 60s. The 1960s. That's how long they've been race swapping. And you know, side note, one of the arguments I see in defense of race swapping is that it's course correction. Okay, so they've been course correcting for decades, yet the problem still persists. And as I was making this video, it really dawned on me how many black characters you see in live action that are actually just race swaps. Outside of Black Panther and the Wakandans, a significant amount of the quote-unquote black characters in their respective live-action universes are just race swapped. Adapting canonically black characters will always be the better option. And I know what y'all are gonna say. Well, why can't we have both? Okay, so remember the goal is to make more black characters mainstream. So ask yourself, which of these can get us closer to that goal? And there's your answer. So the MCU has an upcoming TV series called Wonder Man. Now, it's cool that we're getting another black-led TV series, but Wonder Man is not a black character, at least not in the main universe. And I've seen people sharing this image of him from the Ultimate Universe. Yes, Wonder Man from the Ultimate Universe is black, but he's just a throwaway character and he's had no actual story. And what I find interesting is this is a Wonder Man comic that's supposed to be coming out this year. So even with the TV show coming out, they're still acknowledging that Wonder Man is canonically white. So do with that information what you will. Now that's just one side of how race swapping negatively impacts black characters. The other side of it are the times where they'll race swap the canonically black characters. And I want to direct you to the CW Flash, for instance. So they race swapped Iris West, right? Okay, no big deal. But in the same TV show, they cast a woman who looks like this to play a character who looks like this. And I spoke about this in my video on comic accuracy. When you guys get on the internet and you say this is cool, you're also saying that this is cool. And they'll do this right under your nose. In fact, what I've noticed is when they do race swap the canonically black characters, it's usually a character that's not popular. So they'll get little to no pushback because no one knows who these characters even are. Which again goes back to the whole point of the video about there not being enough black characters that are mainstream, because they wouldn't dare try this with a character like Black Panther, for example. He's just too popular. And this ties into the next point I want to discuss, obscurity. So normally when you hear people advocate for adapting canonically black characters as opposed to race swapping, one of the go-to counter arguments people tend to use is obscurity. So they'll claim that we can't adapt these characters because they're just not popular enough. And that's just a lazy argument, because we're in a time where comic book entertainment is far more popular than it's ever been. So mediums outside the comic books, in my opinion, are where these characters go to gain popularity. Like movies, TV shows, animation, video games. You can look at characters like Blade, for example. Despite the Blade movie being the reason most of these films even exist to begin with, at the time it came out, Blade was still a very obscure character. But since then, I'd argue that his popularity with the general audience has increased significantly. If I'm not mistaken, I think Blade currently has a video game that's in production, and despite the Blade movie being in production limbo, they're still trying to get him back into the MCU. Not to mention, they went as far as bringing back Wesley Snipes, the OG Blade, in Deadpool and Wolverine. To further prove my point, I want to use Shang-Chi as an example. Now, Shang-Chi is not a black character, but that's irrelevant. The point I'm trying to make is Shang-Chi is also an obscure character, but his introduction into the MCU was him getting a whole movie, which was pretty well received. Not to mention, Shang-Chi came out during the pandemic. So the obscurity argument doesn't work because mediums outside the comic books are where these characters tend to gain popularity with the general audience. It's just a matter of getting good writers and directors and whatnot to really bring the characters to the big screen, which brings me to my third and final point, underutilization. So underutilization is probably the biggest offender when it comes to the lack of black mainstream characters. And it can take many forms, whether it's the characters being adapted in projects that are just mid or not good, them being vandalized and assassinated, or them just not being used at all, especially when there are cases where that character could have been a vital part of that particular story. And I'm going to run through some examples of underutilization to really paint you a picture of how damaging it really is. So first, we have War Machine. James Rhodes was quite literally the first black superhero in the MCU, yet after 17 years he's had no movie and no TV show. In fact, Secret Invasion just torpedoed his whole character by revealing that he's been a Skrull since Phase 3, which is dumb. Next, we have Monica Rambeau. The way the MCU has underutilized her truly needs to be studied, because Monica was the first female Captain Marvel in Marvel Comics, long before Carol Danvers ever was. Not to mention, she's the first black female Avenger. And you know, it's quite interesting that the corporation who constantly preaches about how important representation is hasn't properly utilized her. The Captain Marvel movie was marketed as this female empowering film, yet they completely ignored their first female Captain Marvel. My controversial opinion is that this movie rightfully belonged to Monica Rambeau, and to add insult to injury, in that film they reduced her to being the so-called niece of Carol Danvers, which I thought was kind of stupid because when they first met in the comics, Carol and Monica were already both established heroes. So they don't acknowledge her as the first female Captain Marvel, and then they reduce her to being the niece of Carol Danvers in a film that rightfully should have been hers. You guys see the vandalism of the character? Then you have Sam Wilson. Now, I already did a video on why I don't think Sam Wilson should be Captain America, so y'all can go watch that. But my opinion on him being Captain America aside, I thought Brave New World was very mediocre. But it's kind of sad that they made him Captain America way back in 2019, yet they took so long to give him a movie. Plus, I think the film would have worked better with the Serpent Society as the main villains, because not only are they Captain America villains, but they're characters that fall within Sam Wilson's power level. And had they used the Serpent Society as the main villains, there'd probably be no debate about him needing the serum or not, so there's that. Then you have Nick Fury, another OG black character in the MCU. Fury has basically been reduced to an imposter. Just about everything that made him cool has been revealed to be a lie.
Soldiers trust each other. That's what makes it an army. Not a bunch of guys running around shooting guns.
Last time I trusted someone, I lost an eye.
A few moments later.
Oh, motherfucking!
So that scene from Winter Soldier is now meaningless, not to mention his spy career.
When I came here in 1995, you were just a benchwarming nobody in a dumpy field office in S.H.I.E.L.D.
Damn!
I was ascending the ranks.
You didn't start ascending the ranks until me and 19 of my people signed on as your invisible spy network.
Damn!
You know, we fed you more dirt and intel than you could have uncovered on your own.
Damn!
Every time you were promoted inside S.H.I.E.L.D., we did that.
Damn!
Every terror attack you prevented, we did that.
Damn!
Every enemy you sabotaged, an ally you leveraged with dirt no one else in the world had access to, we did that.
Damn!
So all these feats from his career as a spy was really just the scrolls behind the scenes. So Fury's basically a fraud now. Then you have Black Panther. Now, first off, rest in peace to Chadwick Boseman. You know, he did a good job as Black Panther and really bringing this character to life. Not to mention he did it while he was battling cancer, so God rest his soul. Now, I enjoyed the Black Panther movies. I thought they were pretty good. But one major issue I've always had was the way T'Challa's portrayed when it comes to his intellect. So some people might not know this, but Black Panther is very smart. He's arguably one of the smartest characters in the Marvel Universe, and his intelligence qualifies him to be in the same room as people like Tony Stark, Hank Pym, Reed Richards. I probably might need to do a separate video on this. But what the MCU did was they gave all of that to Shuri and made her the genius. And it's interesting because Shuri wasn't created until the early 2000s, so T'Challa was really the genius the whole time. Now, in case you guys didn't know, I'm obviously in favor of them recasting T'Challa, but since they're not doing that, we're not gonna get the rivalry between him and Namor, plus we're not gonna get to see him interact with the Fantastic Four, which was actually the first comic he appeared in, so it's just missed opportunities all around. And mind you, these are just some of the black characters that are already mainstream, and they're still being underutilized. So to recap, when we talk about black characters and representation, the goal should be to make more of them popular. Anything that doesn't get us closer to that is a waste of time in my opinion. But anyway, these are just my thoughts. Let me know yours down in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.